In a climate-controlled room in the Bodleian Library at Oxford, there is a manuscript most people are never allowed to touch. Its catalog reference is Bruce 74. It is written in Ge'ez, the ancient liturgical language of Ethiopia, and for 1400 years, the churches that built the Western Bible behaved as if the book inside it did not exist. That book is the Book of Enoch, and the reason it was left out is not the reason you were told. It was not left out because it was strange or late or unimportant. It was left out because of what it says is directly above your head. Enoch does not describe the sky the way we do. He does not describe open space, or emptiness, or air thinning into black. He describes a ceiling, a solid vault, hammered out and sealed, stretched over the world like a lid over a jar. And he says that above that vault, in the layer no living man is meant to reach, there are beings who do not sleep, who do not look away, and who have been watching the count of human days since before the first city was ever built. They are called the Watchers, and according to Enoch, they never left. To understand why one book frightened so many councils, you first have to understand the man it is named for. Enoch appears in the book of Genesis in a single, almost throwaway line. He is listed as the seventh generation from Adam, and then Scripture says something it says about no one else in that entire lineage. It says that Enoch walked with God, and that he was not, for God took him. Every other name in that chapter ends the same way, and he died. Enoch does not die. He is taken up, alive, out of the world and into the place above it. And the Book of Enoch is presented as the account of what he was shown when he got there. Now, for most of modern history, Western scholars assumed this book was a late invention, something written long after the fact and safely ignored. Then, in 1947, in the caves above the Dead Sea at Qumran, they started pulling scrolls out of the ground, and among them were copies of Enoch in Aramaic, far older than anyone had been willing to admit. 11 separate copies came out of those caves. That is more surviving copies than several of the books that did make it into the Old Testament. This was not a fringe text passed around by cranks. It was widely read, widely copied, and widely known, until, at a church council at Laodicea in the year 364, the doors began to close on it. The question this video is going to answer is a simple one. What did Enoch claim to see up there that made keeping his book feel so dangerous? Because the very first thing he describes when he is lifted above the earth is not a throne, and it is not God. It is a ceiling. Start with the word the oldest texts actually use, because this is where translation quietly changes everything. In the first chapter of Genesis, on the second day, God makes something called the raqia. Most modern Bibles render that word as expanse, or sky, and move on. But raqia does not mean empty space. It comes from a root that means to beat out, to hammer flat, the way a metalworker beats a lump of bronze into a thin, hard sheet. The raqia is not air, it is a beaten dome, a solid thing with a surface. And the Bible describes it exactly that way in the places nobody quotes. The book of Job says the skies were spread out hard, like a mirror of cast metal. The prophet Ezekiel describes a firmament above the heads of the living creatures, shining like terrible crystal, like ice you could stand on. This was not poetry to the people who wrote it. This was architecture. They believed the sky was a physical vault, and that vault had a job. Genesis says the raqia was placed there to divide the waters. There was water below it, the seas, and there was water above it, held back on the other side of the dome. Waters above the firmament. For centuries, theologians treated that line as a metaphor. But Enoch does not treat it as a metaphor. Enoch treats the vault as a machine. In the section scholars call the astronomical book, Enoch is walked through the mechanics of the sky like an apprentice being shown a factory floor. He describes gates set into the vault, portals through which the sun rises and sets and the winds are let out, 12 of them, each with a measured place and a measured season. He is not gazing up in wonder. He is being given a tour of the machinery, gate by gate, as if someone wanted it written down precisely. And here is the part that should stop you. This same architecture, a solid sky, a lid over the world, and an ocean of water held above it, does not begin with Genesis. It is older than Genesis. The civilizations of Mesopotamia, the Sumerians and the Babylonians who were writing on clay 1,000 years before the Hebrew scriptures were set down, described the same structure. A sky that was solid, a body of water above it, and a fixed place beyond the sky where powerful beings dwelt and looked down. 3 separate traditions, in 3 different languages, across 1,000 years, all drew the same lid over the same world. They did not inherit a poem from one another. They inherited a description, and every one of them agreed on the most unsettling detail of all, that we are on the inside of something, sealed under a ceiling, and that we are not alone on the other side of it. Enoch is simply the one who claims to name what is up there. And the moment he does, the book stops sounding like ancient cosmology and starts sounding like a report. The 6th chapter of the Book of Enoch opens with a number, 200. 200 of the watchers, it says, looked down from their station above the world at the daughters of men, and made a decision. Their leader is named Shemihaza, and the text says the 200 were afraid to act alone, because each of them knew that what they were about to do carried a penalty. So they swore an oath together, binding every one of them to the same crime, so that no single one could be blamed. And they swore that oath on the summit of a specific mountain. The text names it, Mount Hermon, the peak that still stands today on the border between Lebanon and Syria, and the name itself is a warning written into the geography. In Hebrew, Hermon is built from the root that gives us the word herem, a thing placed under a ban, a curse, an oath of no return. The mountain where they descended is quite literally the mountain of the ban. They came down, and Enoch says the first thing they did was teach. This is the detail that gives the whole book its other name, the record of forbidden knowledge. One of the watchers, called Azazel, is said to have taught mankind to work metal, to beat swords and knives and shields out of the ground, to make the weapons of war. He taught the making of bracelets and ornaments, the use of paint, the arts of the face. Others taught the cutting of roots, the reading of the stars, the signs of the sun and the moon. Knowledge, the text is careful to say, that humanity was not meant to be handed, not invented by men, given to them, and then came the consequence. The watchers took human wives, and those wives bore children, and the children were not human. Genesis records the same event in 4 short, strange verses in its 6th chapter. The sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore children, and there were giants in the earth in those days. The Hebrew word is Nephilim, and it does not mean giants, not exactly. It comes from a root that means to fall. The Nephilim are the fallen ones, the offspring of the ones who came down. Enoch is far less restrained than Genesis about what they were. In the Ge'ez text, in the 7th chapter, it gives their height, and the number is not subtle. 3,000 ells. Creatures so large, the text says, they turned on humanity and began to consume everything men could produce, and then turned on men themselves. This is the flood's real cause, in Enoch's telling. Not simple wickedness, contamination, a bloodline that was never supposed to exist, spreading across the earth, and a decision made above the vault to wash it away. But here is where most people stop reading, and here is where the book does its most disturbing work. Because the 200 who came down to Hermon are not the whole story. Enoch draws a line between them and another group, the watchers who did not descend, the ones who kept their station, the ones who stayed above the vault and did exactly what their name says they were made to do. They watched. And Enoch's language about them is specific in a way that does not read like myth. He says they do not sleep. He says they do not turn away. He says they stand in a fixed place above the waters, and they measure the days of men, not the deeds of men, the days, as if something is being counted. as if there is a total and a point at which the total is reached. Enoch does not tell us that number, but he is emphatic that the counting is real, that it is ongoing, and that it did not stop when the flood came. And this is the quiet horror at the center of the whole book, the thing that separates Enoch from every gentle story about angels you were ever taught. The watchers above the vault are not described as guardians. They are not described as protectors. They are described as observers with a task, keeping a record, holding a position, waiting for a condition to be met. Enoch says they keep an account of the cities that rise and the cities that fall, written and preserved, as if the whole of human history were a ledger being kept by someone we cannot see, for a purpose we were never told. The ones who fell were dealt with. The ones who watched were not. And what happened to the ones who fell is the part the councils could not fit into a Bible. Because Enoch says, they were not destroyed. They were bound, chained in the valleys of the earth, sealed under the hills, sentenced to wait in the dark. And the sentence has a length. 70 generations, the text says. Bound for 70 generations, until the day of judgment. Bound, not ended. Sealed, not gone. And a seal, by definition, is a thing that is meant to be opened. So the obvious question is the one the text refuses to answer cleanly. When? If the fallen watchers are bound until an appointed day, and the watchers above the vault are counting toward a total, then when does the seal open? This is exactly the point where you would expect a hoax to overplay its hand, to hand you a date, a year, a countdown you can circle on a calendar. Enoch does not. And the fact that it does not is, strangely, part of why it is so hard to dismiss. The Book of Enoch, and the Book of Jubilees alongside it, another text found in those same Qumran caves, another text the Ethiopian church kept and the Western canon dropped, both insist on the same thing. The day is fixed. It is appointed. It is, in the language of the text, written into the foundations of the earth, as unchangeable as the seasons, but the number of it is sealed. Enoch is shown the mechanism, shown the gates, shown the count, and then told, in effect, that the reckoning belongs to the appointed time and not to him. The reckoning is kept above the vault, with the ones doing the counting, and it will arrive on its own schedule, on a day that was decided before the first man drew breath, fixed but hidden, certain but withheld. And that is a far more unsettling claim than any specific year, because a year can pass and be proven wrong. An appointed but unrevealed day cannot. It simply waits. Now step back and look at the whole shape of it, because this is where the pattern stops looking like a collection of old stories and starts looking like a single description told 3 times. A solid vault over the world, an ocean of water held above it, a population of watchers beyond the water, in a fixed station, sleepless, counting, waiting for a day that is set but not shown. That structure is in Genesis. It is in Enoch. It is in the clay of Mesopotamia 1,000 years before either. 3 traditions, separated by language, by geography, by centuries, none of them able to borrow freely from the others, and all of them placing the same lid over the same sky, and the same watchers on the far side of it. There are only a few ways to read a coincidence that large. Either it is exactly that, an accident, human beings everywhere imagining the same comforting shape overhead, or every one of these cultures inherited the description from something older, a single source that has been lost so completely we do not even have its name. Or, and this is the reading the book itself offers, the reading it was very likely left out for offering. They were all describing the same real thing, because the thing was really there, and some of them were shown it. This is not a pattern. It is not a coincidence. Or at least, that is what a growing number of people who read these texts closely have started to say out loud, because the moment you take Enoch seriously enough to notice the pattern, you run straight into the second half of the story. Not what the book says, but what happened to the book for saying it. The Book of Enoch was not quietly forgotten. It was actively let go of, and there were people at the time who fought to keep it. In the early centuries of the Church, Enoch was read, quoted, and respected. The New Testament itself quotes it directly. The short letter of Jude, near the very end of the Bible, cites Enoch by name and repeats his prophecy almost word for word. Early Christian writers treated it as scripture. One of the most influential of them, Tertullian, defended the book openly and argued that it had been unfairly cast aside. He lost that argument. Over the following centuries, as the councils met and the lists were drawn, and the canon of the Western Bible hardened into its final shape, Enoch fell outside the line. By the time of that council at Laodicea in 364, and the councils that followed, the book was being read out of the record. Copies stopped being made. The language it survived in disappeared from Europe, and for roughly 1400 years, the Western world genuinely believed the Book of Enoch was gone, lost, extinct, a title mentioned in old texts with no text behind it, except it was never actually gone, because one church never let go of it. Far to the south, in the highlands of Ethiopia, the Ethiopian Orthodox Church had kept Enoch inside its Bible the entire time, copied faithfully in Ge'ez, generation after generation, while the rest of the world assumed it had vanished. And in 1773, a Scottish traveler named James Bruce carried 3 copies of that Ethiopian Bible out of the highlands and back to Europe, and one of them is the manuscript that now sits in that locked room in the Bodleian Library. Bruce 74. The book the councils had spent centuries erasing walked back into the West in a traveler's luggage. It was translated into English in 1821, and again, more completely, in 1912. And suddenly, anyone could read the thing the canon had worked so hard to close the door on. And when they read it, they found the ceiling. They found the waters above it. They found the 200, and the mountain of the ban, and the forbidden knowledge, and the ones who stayed above the vault, sleepless, counting. This is why it was left out. Not because it was too crazy to believe, because it was too specific to explain. So what do you do with a book like this? There are honestly only 3 ways to hold it. The first is that it is a product of its time, that ancient people everywhere imagined a solid sky because they had no way of knowing better, and the resemblance across cultures is just what happens when frightened people look up. The second is that all of these traditions were drinking from a single well, far older than any of them, some lost civilization or lost knowledge that seeded the same story into Mesopotamia and Israel and Ethiopia alike, and that we have simply never found the source. And the third is the one the text asks you to sit with, that Enoch wrote down what Enoch was shown, that the vault is described so plainly because it was seen, and that the watchers are named because they were there to be named. You do not have to choose tonight. But notice what the book never lets you do. It never lets you feel discovered. There is no secret being revealed here, no hidden thing dragged into the light. The Book of Enoch was sitting in the open the entire time, quoted in the New Testament, kept whole by an entire church, carried out of the mountains 250 years ago, translated, printed, available in any language you like. It was not hidden from you, it was just left out. And it still says the same thing it always said, that there is a ceiling over the world, that there is water beyond the ceiling, and that above the water, in the station they have never once abandoned, the watchers are still awake and still counting. If any part of that landed the way it landed for me, subscribe, because the next book they left out of the Bible is even harder to explain than this one.